When I was putting some of my comments together for tonight, I thought about last December, and I talked about our Jewish community here in Missoula, that there was some mailings that went out that was hateful rhetoric. And I was asked to come together with members of our community and the religious faiths and the leadership team and stand up with the Jewish people at their synagogue and come together as a community for hate. And so public speaking, who likes this, right? And I show up and cars just keep pulling in. They're just pulling in. And at the end of the day, there was 200 people there. There was community leaders representing every segment of our community, religious leaders representing every faith that we have here in Missoula. And I felt like it was so important for law enforcement to be present in this because what they wanted to hear was that we take this stuff serious, that we take the spreading of hateful rhetoric very seriously. And if it targets or specifically identifies a group member, then it is a problem. And we're gonna do reports on that and we're gonna stat it. And when I stood up there, one of the most important thing that I said was exactly that, and that I was proud to be there and that we stood behind them. And I just can't tell you how well that message was received and how proud I was to be in that moment and say there. We talk a lot about zero tolerance for discrimination and what are some of the things that we do at the office to make sure that that's not happening, and how would we identify if it is happening. You know, one of the things that I've done as sheriff is I've embraced this relationship with the ACLU, right? One of my big roles as sheriff is being in charge of the operation of the detention center, and that's a challenge. I mean, Cheryl will tell you later that there's a lot going on out there, and my career really was in patrol. It was in detectives, in some supervision roles, but I had never worked in the jail. I had never had much of a detention center. And early on in 2015, the ACLU published a report, and it was called Montana Jails in Crisis. Has anybody seen that report at all? Okay. And it was very interesting because that kind of was a roadmap for me as sheriff, and it identified the problems with county jails across Montana, but it also provided the solutions for how it should be, how jails should operate. And that relationship turned into meetings with the ACLU and consultations with how do we restrain someone that's at a doctor's appointment, and what is our policy for someone that is delivering a baby? We definitely don't want to restrain that person, right? But how do we come up with these policies and there's procedures to deal with that? And what is the proper square footage for inmates? We're overcrowded. Can we have 3 in a cell? Can we have 2 in a cell? And so that relationship, it's been good. And oftentimes these kind of groups, the ACLU and other groups, are very critical of law enforcement, but we just faced it head on and said, look, we're in this together. Nobody has the right answer. We're going to try to work together to come up with a solution. We keep statistical information on all of our public contacts. So things like calls for service, traffic stops, tickets that we write, we stat. And by statute, each year we conduct an audit of that information and we try to see if it reveals any patterns or any problems. And the numbers don't lie. And they'll tell us if something bad is happening with a deputy, and then they'll tell us if something good is happening. And it's been a good thing. We've done that at our office to make sure that we continue to do the good job that we do. The jail has been a huge issue. The jail has consistently been overcrowded. When I first became sheriff, at its worst, it was 16 people sleeping in booking on the floor. I thought, wow, that's really something. 2 weeks ago, I think Commander Ziegler will tell you 31.
We've been as high as 35. Mm-hmm.
And so we got together as a community, and Tim, you're late.
Hey.
And we commissioned a jail diversion advisory board. And we made it up of myself, Commissioner Colaroli, City Councilwoman Emily Bentley. We created an advisory board, and then we worked with the city. The city contributed $20,000. The county contributed $20,000, and State Senator Cynthia Wolken worked with Commander Ziegler to analyze the data and come up with a plan for our community. And that plan, I'll go into more details about it. It has been adopted by the city of Missoula, and it's also been adopted by Missoula County, and we're waiting for funding. And there's some key things that came out of that plan. When we talk about jail diversion, it's always important for me as sheriff to say we're talking about nonviolent, non-dangerous offenders who find themselves in jail because of substance abuse issues, drug addictions, or worse yet, mental illnesses. And there's just nowhere else to take them but the jail. So that plan's moving forward. I think this is a great time for Commander Ziegler to talk about her role with the jail diversion plan and her work with Senator Wolken.
Okay. So, hi, I'm Cheryl Ziegler, and I'm sorry, I am a loud person, so if you guys need the down, please just yell. Perfect, that's gonna work out well then. So just a little background on me. I started with the Sheriff's Office in 2000 as a juvenile detention officer. From there, I promoted to a first-line supervisor in juvenile, and then transitioned to the Adult Detention Center as a sergeant in 2011. When the sheriff worked on drafting or getting this plan kind of going, he saw an opportunity for me to participate in master jail diversion as a lieutenant. So got another promotion, another opportunity to serve our jail and our community in a different way. Since then, I have retransitioned back to juvenile as the assistant commander there. So that's kind of the course of my career. While we were involved in master jail diversion, I worked primarily with Senator Wolken and with City Councilwoman Emily Bentley in kind of defining what it is that we wanted to know about our jail populations. And questions came from all over the place and all sorts of stakeholders within our community to help us identify what is the problem. Is there a problem? What do we need to know about these populations? Are we even looking at what we need to know about these populations? And we identified a lot of things along the way. One, we don't necessarily know what we're looking at. We've done somewhat a poor job of data collection over the years, so we definitely quickly identified some gaps. Two, those are things that we need to fix moving forward. We'd get questions on how many veterans do you house? We don't know. That wasn't necessarily something that we historically looked at. Is that a vulnerable population in our community? Absolutely. Are we tracking folks with substance abuse issues or with mental health issues? Not well. Are we aware that they're there? Of course we are. Were we doing a good job with figuring out how many were there, how they got there, where they went after the fact? Nope. So those are some of the challenges and things that we've identified and then came forward in this plan for us to address in a better way for better service to members of our community and folks while they're at the jail. So the result of that has been some development in different areas. I know he plans to kind of run through some of the things that that plan specifically identified as problems moving forward. I don't know if Sheriff, you'd like me to just kind of hit some right now. One of those things in dealing with kind of a vulnerable mental health population is a program called CIT. Is anybody familiar with CIT? So CIT, great. CIT is a crisis intervention team. It's something that in the last few years has really taken a stronghold in Montana, which is great. We have an executive director for that. We're working through that. But it's designed to bring mental health providers within a community and law enforcement providers within a community together to better serve mental health populations as they interact with our different agencies. So how does law enforcement do a better job? How do we divert those folks from going to jail? Because the answer previously when they encountered someone with an illness or someone that appeared to be psychotic but they don't know what they're dealing with was to just lock them up. That's not a good answer, right? That's a really bad answer. So really getting some folks, law enforcement communities together and figuring out how to better identify these folks, how we can better divert them, how we can link them to services and resources within our community without detaining them or making them criminals as a result of their mental illness. So CIT was actually formed out of a program in Mississippi originally. some years ago after a violent encounter between a mentally ill man and law enforcement. And that sheriff at the time said, "We've got a problem." And this was, relatively recently in the 80s, so not that long ago, really, in the course of things. But it's really brought to light some just great partnerships within our community. Missoula has done one full academy of this so far. We have a second one scheduled for April, but they are ongoing in communities across our state. There's currently one going on right now in Gallatin County, who's really kind of the forefront of this. The executive director, for CIT Montana is employed by the Gallatin County Sheriff's Office. His name is Jim Anderson, fantastic sergeant there. So if you do want some more information about that program, he's a great resource. I'm also a law enforcement coordinator for the crisis intervention team here in Missoula. So if there's follow-up on that, please feel free to reach out to me as well. So Missoula City Police engage in that, as well as Missoula County, mental health agencies from across our community, university police, the hospitals, and other organizations that have an interest in providing better services to the mentally ill in our community. Another thing that was identified relating to the mentally ill in our community is a lack of secure emergency detention beds. So right now, if somebody in our community is identified as unable to care for themselves, a danger to themselves or others, they are sent to the state hospital. That's not ideal for a number of reasons. It takes folks out of their community when they could otherwise stay in their community with social contacts, family support, etc., and really recover, come out of crises more quickly, more easily. So we want to work on solving that and being able to keep folks within their community. So secure emergency detention beds are something that Western Montana Mental Health and our department actually is really focused on trying to get going to keep folks here in the community. What that would provide is 2 beds essentially at Dakota Place. Is anybody familiar with Dakota Place? So it's a crisis house through Western Montana Mental Health here in Missoula that serves folks on a voluntary basis currently, but with the development of those beds could serve folks on an involuntary basis. So if they're identified by a court as needing intervention against their will, we could hold them locally, try to resolve that more quickly with more engagement from their local providers and family support. We are one of the last communities to really get on board with secure emergency detention beds. They exist in Gallatin, they exist in Lake County, they exist in Helena, or Lewis and Clark County, if we're going counties, Yellowstone County, and very locally, Ravalli County. Ravalli County has a facility called West House that is just utterly amazing in serving both folks on an involuntary and a voluntary basis, also done through Western Montana Mental Health, just down the road from us. So we really took a page from their book and seeing how successful that had been in their community and reducing law enforcement contacts with the mentally ill and reducing detention of those folks that are mentally ill. So we're really excited to get that going. We originally put in for some funding through HB 33 to do kind of a study on the feasibility of getting those detention beds within our community. That was completed last year. We are a go for that, and we do anticipate that those beds currently under construction will open sometime this year. Yay, big win. Yeah. Big win. Okay. What else did you have for me, sir? Oh.
And just a little bit more about CIT, just so you understand it. The idea is pairing up a law enforcement officer with a mental health provider, and then when they're going to a call for service and they identify the person involved in the call as having a mental health issue rather than an issue related to criminality, they can just divert that person right there. So there's no arrest, there's no incarceration, there's no court dates, there's anything. They can take them right to a mental health facility. And so that's great training. Portland Police Bureau, they call them behavioral health cars, and they're working all over the city. And at any time, if there's a call where someone is having a mental health episode, they have that ability to get that person services. It's all about connecting people to services. And the biggest problem that the jail diversion plan identified in our community is we're lacking services. And the biggest thing is that we do not have a 24-hour mental health crisis facility. We have some options through at ER into Providence and then maybe the hospital, but oftentimes we'll deal with someone who, let's say, is suicidal or we have a standoff with, or has some kind of mental health episode going on, you know, our first and best bet, or our only bet at this point, is to take them to the hospital and to have them evaluated to the state hospital. Sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't. I've seen it work where people go away for an amount of time to the hospital and maybe get stabilized and on a medication regimen, maybe a diagnosis of whatever the psychosis was, but I've seen it not work. I've seen it where we would have a standoff and utilize all types of resources and put people in harm's way, and that person is 4 to 6 hours later walking down Orange Street because they've been released, or they've told a tale at the emergency room to be able to convince someone that they're going to be okay, or someone will look after them, or someone will take their guns from them, or they'll take different things from them. So it's a huge issue. And one thing that I was most excited about was the partnership with our hospitals, because our hospitals have hundreds of thousands of dollars in uncompensated medical care in their emergency rooms. And St. Pat's Community, they talked about initially Providence bringing forward about a 66 bed mental health facility for our community, and they were just looking for dirt. They needed to be within a donut of about 5 miles of the hospital, and they were looking for dirt. And to me, that's an easy sell. It's like, look, we're not going to build or make our jail larger. We have space out at that parcel. Let's give them a spot. How nice would it be to have a mental health facility, have a law enforcement drop-off for people in crisis? And that is something that I hope, as this plan goes forward, that we can have for our community. Another thing is addictions and substance abuse. You know, if you've been a law enforcement officer like I have, and you meet these people that are addicted to methamphetamine in our community, or opiates, we're probably at the tune of about 16 to 17 heroin overdoses last year in our community. And the problem is when you meet someone and they're getting arrested and they're getting fired and they're losing their job and their car's getting towed, they'll tell you, they'll say, look, I'm tired of this life. I want out. I'm ready to quit. I'm ready to stop doing this. Where do I go? Well, we don't have a facility for you right now. We have some options through Department of Corrections, but you're going to need to be charged with a criminal offense, and you're probably going to need to be screened, and you're going to need to sit, and a year to a year and a half later, you might be able to enter one of those programs. So as a community, another thing that was identified is we just don't have a place for people to go to recover from their addictions. And when you look at the liabilities for Missoula County, and you look at people that have died while detoxing in our holding cells, or that have committed suicide, it always has some kind of substance abuse issue or a mental health tone to it. So it's super important that we tackle that problem. Another interesting thing is housing. Trying to come up with housing for people that are getting out of jail and connecting them to resources. Now, I know that Missoula County, the commissioners are not going to fund everything that's recommended in this program, but if the Missoula City takes a look at some of the housing options, some of the resource and addiction options, maybe Missoula County, since we have the jail, can look at the mental health issues and maybe some of the inpatient addiction, and as a community, we can both tackle some of the different recommendations. So real quick, I'll go through some of the other things that came out of the plan. The plan's available on the County of Missoula website, as well as the City of Missoula website. You can read it in its entirety. Senator Wolkin did an outstanding job, very articulate, sharp, and data. I mean, it was amazing. We're very fortunate to have her do that. Some of the other recommendations, social drop-in center, supportive housing, treatment courts. So the Sheriff's Office last year, Judge Brenda Desmond, her treatment court for veterans was short of funds. They had lost a grant, and we were able to fund that program for 1 year, do what we'd like to call a bridge funding for a year until she could apply for new grants. By doing that, there were 11 people that were on the waiting list in our detention center waiting to enter that program. And so things like that were identified, treatment courts, expanding treatment courts. Missoula County has a juvenile unit as well. We talked about, it's one of 4 in the state. Commander Ziegler is in charge of that unit, and really we've talked about repurposing that unit and using that unit perhaps for a mental health unit for our detention center. That was identified as a potential solution in our plan. Legislatively, they're looking at reducing some of the mandatory minimums for driving suspended. That's a 2-day in jail mandatory minimum. Theft, second offense or third offense has a mandatory minimum up to 30 days in jail. So Senator Wolkin and other representatives from Missoula are looking at legislatively taking those mandatory jail time sentences out, giving the judges more discretion to not have to put people in jail, as well as looking at the bond schedule. $100 might not be a lot for, a whole lot of us in this room. It might be a lot, but for someone downtown that's living, that's homeless, $60 a lot, $40 a lot, and if that's their bond, they're going to sit in jail. And sometimes when they're arrested on charges like disorderly conduct that has a maximum $100 fine and 10 days in jail, if they want to challenge that charge and there's a high bond, they could find themselves sitting far greater than 10 days, the maximum, and it would cost this community a lot more to house them than what the maximum fine ever could be. So some of this stuff just doesn't make sense, and it's this plan really identified a lot of that stuff. Another challenge is the lack of public defender service, lawyer continuances, where someone is in our detention center, they're willing to plead guilty. Maybe it's to an offense where they would get a suspended or a deferred sentence, but they have to remain in custody until the state conducts a pre-sentencing investigation for the judge, so that can delay them and have them be in there for quite a long time. We developed a risk assessment form at our detention center so that when an officer brings in somebody, we can fill out a form and assess a risk of them as whether they're a danger to the public or not, whether they're a danger to themselves, and then that information can go directly to the judge when they're arraigned, and the judge can make an informed decision about whether or not that person needs to be held. So we're trying to do a lot of that stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the Safety, Justice, and Challenge Grant. So Missoula County was one of 20 counties and cities across the nation that was awarded $50,000 to study the incarceration issue related to Native Americans and try to come up with reform, justice reform, to try to safely drive down jail usage, reduce racial and ethnic disparities in our criminal justice system. So what that plan is going to involve is we have some programs that we're going to bring in. We have a former detention officer, Kevin Kickenwoman. Who else is?
And Kathy Littleleaf, they're both with the Missoula Urban Indian Center.
Okay, and so we're going to consult with them, and they're going to come in and they're going to interact with the Native American population that we have in our detention center. They have that trust, right, to go in and talk, and they're going to identify, conduct an analysis of what's going on. Some of the things that I've identified as some different programs that are needed in our facility. Many Broken Hearts, classes that focus on grief, loss, trauma, specifically created by historical intergenerational trauma. Wellbriety, similar to AA, but more appropriate, culturally appropriate to the Native American population. Regaining the Warrior, a program that helps Native American men reclaim their role and identity in their family and community, reconnects them to their traditional life. And these programs we're working with, it was Lydia Silva, but now she's working somewhere else. But we've had a good relationship with the Missoula Urban Indian Health Center. And so I brought some information about that grant. I printed some for anyone that would like to read about it, but it's pretty exciting that our community out of the entire United States was one of 20 to apply and receive that award. And hopefully we can use that money to properly study and then reduce that higher rate, because that speaks to a problem. It really does. So a lot of exciting things going on, a lot of information out there. If I missed anything or if someone had a specific question, just let me know and I'll do my best to answer it. So Dave, do you have any?
Yeah, if you have a question, go ahead and write it on the paper and bring it up.
Didn't get an overview, so I'm going to kind of interject here. And if anybody wants an overview of our facility, I kind of glossed right over that. So if anybody's not familiar with the makeup of our facility or what that really looks like and wants kind of a quick rundown.
That would be helpful.
Raise your hand.
I think, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Tell us all about it.
So the Missoula County Detention Facility holds 394 inmates, much larger, I think, than most people realize. We hold 24 juvenile inmates and 370 adult inmates. At least that's our hard bed capacity. As he kind of alluded to, we've been well over that number for about the last year plus. The makeup of that is this. We have 144 mask beds. That's a program that's called the Missoula Assessment and Sanction Center. It's a contract facility with the state of Montana to hold Department of Corrections inmates. Once they are initially sentenced to the Department of Corrections, they come to us for evaluation and placement within the Department of Corrections system. So they're not necessarily inmates that are from our community, they're from all over the state, and they're not necessarily offenders that were sentenced in our jurisdiction. Again, they're from all over the place. Our county makeup is 228 beds. That consists of male and female. We were originally designed to hold 32 female inmates of those beds, but we hover somewhere around 64. So we've had to kind of get space elsewhere in our jail. Don't worry, we're not sleeping 32 females on the floor. That's not happening. We've just acquired space that was originally intended to be for the male population and transitioned that to female space. So that's kind of the basic rundown. And we hold county inmates for the city, for any arresting agency here. We hold federal inmates. We hold state inmates that are on our county side, be it that they've transitioned back from a prison or from a county placement, or a state placement to face new offenses or to go through some review. We have a variety of folks that we're serving out there right now.
How many meals do they serve a day?
A little over 1,200 meals are served per day that are created by actually state inmates and civilian staff in the only scratch kitchen that remains in a jail or correctional environment across the state of Montana. And we're quite proud to say that we actually have and have held for years the highest health code rating that exists. So it's the cleanest kitchen on the planet. Ladies, you could do your mascara in the hood vents. It's really quite weird. I mean, it's very shiny. But yeah, no, we're very proud of that. One of the only ones that remains.
Great. Well, we have plenty of questions here for you.
Yeah.
Let me start off. This questions comes from somebody in the audience as well as from from Representative Curdy, Rose Curdy, who's very concerned about the deportation efforts at the federal level. The question is, how will you respond if you are pressured to join President Trump's deportation plan? And also, if you could comment on if you know anything about the city as well.
Okay. Well, I can't comment on the city, but law enforcement, of course, is the executive branch of law enforcement. So we are tasked with, we swear to uphold the Constitution of the state of Montana and the United States of America, right? And we do. We follow the law, we enforce the law, but by doing that, we also, if there's an issue that comes up, we work with our attorneys and we make sure that what we're enforcing is appropriate. We haven't had those issues here in Missoula with deportation or with involvement from ICE or immigrations officials here in Missoula. If they were to come to Missoula, if there was an issue where they were going to deport people and they asked for our assistance, if it was legal and they needed our assistance, we would assist them. But that doesn't mean that we wouldn't consult with our attorneys to make sure that what we're doing is legal and proper. And it doesn't mean that people wouldn't have the right after the fact to question whether or not those laws were legitimate or to go through the legislative process to change those laws. So law enforcement is always asked, it's interesting because I'm asked about, as sheriff, will you stop the federal government from coming in and taking firearms away from legal law-abiding citizens? Well, legal law-abiding citizens, no, but I do support background checks. So there's never a definite, absolute answer to this, but in law enforcement, we don't have the luxury pick and choose what laws we can serve and what laws we can't. And throughout my career, there's been times where the law required some type of action, and maybe a better type of action was warranted. But at a certain point, when you're a law enforcement officer and you're sworn to follow the law, and the other branches come up with these laws, it doesn't mean you can't work together to change things. But if it becomes an issue, that's what's really going to need to happen.
So along the same lines, the other hot spot of the national debate is Muslims and how they're being treated. What are you doing, if anything, to protect the Muslim community in these troubled times?
Well, we're speaking out. I mean, that's the thing is we protect the individual rights of all citizens, all religious beliefs, period. And we've shown that with the story that I shared with you about the Jewish synagogue and our faith communities. And I think that's the important thing, is just speaking out. Obviously, if it turns into the specific targeting of an individual or a specific group, and it goes beyond First Amendment stuff, then we will intercede on their behalf. We're going to do what it takes to protect people and their rights.
Okay, we're going to keep the tough questions coming.
Okay.
At the present time, finding affordable housing for people with felony conviction on the records is extremely difficult. So
Yes.
if a person has to register as a violent offender, or it means that finding housing is almost impossible. Big problem. How do you have any beginnings of an answer to that?
Well,
Go ahead.
I'll take
Yeah.
that one, actually, if you don't mind. I mean, there are a lot of groups in our community that currently work on that problem, and we have kind of posed some solutions to that, not necessarily coming out of our department, but coming out of other community agencies that are equally interested in that. So Partners for Reintegration has done a lot of work on that with the Interfaith Collaborative. We've seen the opening of some kind of private homes that are looking at that as a bit of an enterprise. That's okay, we'll take it. Good Neighbors is an example of one of those programs that was actually opened by folks with a bit of a history themselves who saw that need, that problem personally when they came out of incarceration situations and are now kind of reaching out and giving back to help others that are in that situation. So we are seeing some progress in that. Yes, it's slow. I don't know that there is an overnight solution to that, but it's opening minds and opening kind of hearts of community members to help house those folks, and getting information out there that just because someone has a history doesn't necessarily make them a future problem for you. And there are a lot of community agencies that are working on that.
I'll add to that just real quick.
Sure.
One of my other roles besides sheriff that I'm super proud of is I'm on the board of the Poverello Center. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. And the Poverello has been just a unique experience to learn about the clientele that they actually serve in our community and how many people out there need those housing options and what type of people need those options and what those barriers are. So not sure how the sheriff can affect the housing issue in our community, but I do know that we have good people in legislature, and Willis Curtis is one of them, and Cynthia Wilkin, and our representatives, I think in Missoula, they're leading the fight in the state to try to come up with some way to not have someone's background tarnish them or prevent them from becoming a better citizen and having a place to live, and those are all really good efforts. So.
How do you plan to work with training your officers to be sensible and sensitive to all minorities, especially Native Americans that are often treated worse?
Well, we train. We attend mandatory training at the academy on racial profiling. Now it's impartial policing is the term that they use for it. But we just continue to train, and we also have a department that we're working towards hiring a department that represents our community. We probably 3 months ago hired probably our first Native American deputy. And I was going to have him come here tonight with me. He's about 6'7", maybe. And so I think as we grow, as we train, and our department represents more of our community with both male and female deputies, but then also represents the makeup of our community as well, I think that's a way to to integrate and just make sure that we're not participating in any type of discriminatory conduct.
Yeah, just to follow up on that question, one of the questions is about the diversity of your workforce. How
Okay.
does it look now? How do you characterize the diversity of the workforce, and what are you doing to further increase the diversity?
Sure, these are tough questions, but good questions. So recruiting is huge. So recruitment videos for both deputy and detention officers. We've worked with Lydia Silva and the Missoula Urban Indian Health Center. For the first time, we had a career day up at the Salish Kootenai College. So we're trying to just do better at what we've done. And rather than just run an ad in the Missoulian and say, hey, we're hiring deputies or detention, we have a video and we have some professional work that's been put into trying to reach all the different segments of our population, and it's been pretty successful. Retention is a big problem, not so much for deputy sheriffs, but more so for detention officers. And this last process, where we have the recruitment video, you can talk about how many had applied in the last process compared to this one.
Well, I think the overall number coming into the last one was about 38. We ultimately hired 8 of those. This application round, which we're actually interviewing this week, we had 56 applicants for those detention officer positions. So we are certainly seeing an increase in those folks that are interested in putting in and working with our agency. So that's great.
Has anybody seen our recruitment video for the office? Okay. So I know that it's online, Facebook. Movie theater is another media where they're talking about running our ad, but it hits all of the makeup of our community, which is what we hope at some point that our sheriff's office will be. So.
I'm going to keep reading these questions again.
Sure.
If there are more, just go to the front here and probably pick them up. And if you want a piece of paper to write additional questions on, please start with that. Okay. What about people with developmental disabilities? What kind of diversion programs do they fit into? And for instance, are they part of the mental health projects that could serve them, or are there unique needs being done in other ways?
Sure.
That is actually a really awesome question, and one of the things that as a lieutenant I found the most challenging to work with, to be honest, because that is a really underserved and under-resourced facet of our community. So when I'm working with someone in the jail that has developmental disabilities, or there's really nowhere to divert them to, depending on the level of their care. And so I have literally, you can call everybody you know. Adult Protection Services sends you somewhere else. These folks send you somewhere else. Nope, we can't serve that. There's no funding mechanism. No, maybe Ravalli County can help you. And honestly, it's just a lot of reaching out and a lot of resourcing, but it's just very much an underfunded, in my assessment or my experience, area of our population. One of the great things, I guess, is that we don't have to deal with it that often. I mean, that's a population we don't see incarcerated all that much. But when we do, it is certainly challenging to work with those folks. But it is the forefront of our work in trying to get any of those vulnerable populations better served and better served outside of incarceration. So it's a focus, but it's certainly not one that we've been hit over the head with a hammer yet, so to speak. So.
Well, along those lines with the funding, I mean, you have a lot of great programs that
Sure.
we're trying to, we're excited about. Some of that funding comes from the state level. Are you thinking that you're going to have problems funding those with the state legislature, or are you optimistic? What's your assessment? What can we do to help maybe on that score?
So, I can speak on one of them. I know there's a bill before the legislature on crisis intervention team, which we kind of talked about earlier, that joining of mental health and law enforcement to better serve those populations. Feel free to speak out on that one. So far, we're breezing through. We're feeling pretty comfortable, but funding that right now is super, super important for communities across our state. Just give some ongoing funding there.
If you have specific details, we can relay it and help support that.
I can email them.
Get it out.
Okay, great.
So Senator Wilkin was working on a bill to have the state match what local governments pay for pretrial services. So right now, Missoula County pays Missoula Correctional Services about $500,000. The city of Missoula pays about the same. There's other companies, compliance monitoring, great technology, really cool stuff. The home arrest bracelets, they have the programs where you can show up between 7 and 9 in the morning and you can take a breath test. And if you blow zeros, you go to work, you come home. After work, you go back, you blow again between 7 and 9. And if you blow zeros, you stay out of jail. You keep your job, you stay with your family. And so those types of services really need to be expanded, and they need the funding at the state level. I mean, Missoula County spends a great amount of money on these types of programs, and so does the city, but the clientele that they're reaching just doesn't meet the need of the community. So it's on a legislative level, any of that state money that can match local dollars that can be put towards pretrial or any of the monitoring services, the GPS bracelets, any of that stuff, that's all great stuff that keeps people out of jail. The bracelets, the GPS monitoring, about $20 a day. The breath tests are $2 a test. Spending someone, having them spend the night in jail is about $108 is our cost to take care of them. So it just, physically, it makes sense, especially if they're non-violent, non-dangerous. So that's what we would ask the legislature to support.
So one sharp listener here was worried about what happened to the juvenile, people in the juvenile facility when it was repurposed for.
It was not repurposed. It was one of the conversations that came up as part of the plan. So we do still currently hold juvenile offenders. Right, and we hold for a variety of communities, so that is alive and well. I mean, it's certainly a population we have to serve, albeit how disheartening that can be at times to talk about kids in custody. But it is certainly a population that has a need, and I think we do a really good job with that population.
Well, I'll let you guys have the last word, but one last question, unless there are any other questions from the audience, is, and I don't know if you can comment on this one because it's specific, but there was an attack on 2 men downtown Friday night. Would that be treated as a hate crime? I don't know if you can comment on that.
It was downtown, I imagine it'd be the cities too.
Yeah, I did see that, I believe, in the paper, in the media, and of course it's a city police case. But any crime that's motivated for those reasons needs to be charged as a hate crime. And I think you'll see that the city police does a good job. They do an outstanding job, and they'll take that very seriously, and they'll investigate that properly. So
Any last words?
just thank you for listening to me. So jail diversion is something I'm super passionate about. I mean, I really am. When I took over as sheriff, they had these plans to build this larger jail, and it was $12 to $14 million, and we may have to someday, but we were like, time out, let's look at who's in jail, and let's look at who's nonviolent and who's non-dangerous. And the thing is, we just need community support. We've done what we can do from the sheriff's office budget, working within our own budget. We've hired a jail lieutenant to monitor the daily population, to work with the judges to release people. We've also added a mental health worker. We've done what we can within the 4 corners of our budget, but where the rubber meets the road, county commissioners, for me. I need to be able to convince them that dirt out by the jail, if there's a hospital willing to come out and build a 66-bed mental health facility and they just want the dirt, well, that's a pretty good use of it for our community, right? So that's the thing. I appreciate everybody looking for me, but as this moves forward, I'm not going to give up. I'm resilient. I will push this plan forward, and we just need your support to contact. Yes?
So is there a way that we could let Dave or somebody
You bet.
know when there's something that we could do, and then whoever our chairperson is can let us all know, because other groups do like legislative alerts and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Phone your legislator and say, vote for this or not.
I
So
will.
if you could do that, I think
Yeah.
it'd be wonderful.
I'd be happy to do that. I know that when we talked about treatment court, having the sheriff's office fund that, initially that was not a very popular idea. But at a meeting we brought in people from the program, people that had gone through and succeeded, and we brought in some volunteers that are mentors for people in the program. And we had a public meeting, and when you fill the room with people that can share their experiences and their successes, boy, they stamped approved about as quick as you could possibly do it. So that's the only thing I'd ask for your support going forward. Yes?
I was wondering if that building, that proposed building might include shelter or wet shelter.
That is part of it. There's a large portion of land east of the facility that would be available for that. That did come up. We had United Way, the 10-year plan to end homelessness. They were taking a look at some of the housing first options for people. But that area out there is really designed well, and it's perfect. It's close to services, so I would hope so. Yes,
So
ma'am.
the type of facility you're talking about building that hospital, right now, folks would have to go out of state to get that kind of treatment, right?
Not out of state, but primarily out of our community.
Yeah, to the state hospital, Warm Springs. So how many trips on the worst day do you think we're making to Warm Springs and back?
Worst day, we could be transporting 6 out of the Missoula
back
community
and
to the
forth.
state hospital. 6 individuals, which is just so disruptive. And for somebody in crisis, it's even more disruptive and traumatizing. And to be transported by a sheriff's office, which is what our statute dictates, we criminalize in some respects just by following our statute those folks that are suffering from mental illness. And so we certainly absolutely support emergency detention
Yeah.
beds in our community and better care for those folks within our community. Because there are family members, there are community members, and we want
So-
to do a good job.
So I'll leave a bunch of my cards. I'll make sure that I have one for Dave, and just thank you again. I really
Yeah,
appreciate
for
it.
questions, please do. Thank you again.
Yeah.